Good Monday to all of you in the Crowdsource the Truth audience. You're listening to the Hudson Report. This is Rock Hudson, your host today on this Monday, September the 18th, 2017. You know, it's a funny thing about our government these days, and as time progresses, it just seems that we find more and more corruption of individuals who have been there and entrenched there for many, many years. And as a matter of fact, an individual that I want to talk about to you today is Senator John McCain. We're naming names. And John, you're first. You know, the other day, one of what I consider to be a great alternative news agency is the True Pundit and Thomas Paine over there. They ran an article on the 14th, September 14th, by their investigative bureau, and it was entitled, FBI Paid $100,000 Plus for Concocted Trump Dossier During the Election. You remember that dossier, folks? And guess what? John McCain helped to broker the classified deal with none other than James Comey. In the article, it says that FBI insiders said that fired FBI Director James Comey and Andrew McCabe, Deputy FBI Director, used Bureau funds to underwrite the controversial dossier on President Donald Trump during the 2016 presidential election. And the deal to dig dirt on a presidential candidate was put together with the help of Senator John McCain. These new revelations, in fact, might be, well, the worst-kept secret or one of them, worst-kept secret in Washington, D.C. But now, thank God that we still have some great people in the FBI and other agencies of the federal government. And it seems now that a large number of rank-and-file FBI agents want the Bureau to come clean on its relationship with the author of the problematic Trump dossier, the former British spy, Christopher Steele. True Pundit first received intelligence from FBI sources in March that the Bureau had struck a financial deal with Steele in 2016. And so since then, federal law enforcement agents, not just the FBI folks, federal law enforcement agents have since divulged to the True Pundit the following. One, Steele was likely paid in the $100,000 range by the FBI for the research, and there's indication that says he may have received more than that. Two, Senator John McCain was involved in brokering the introduction of Steele or Steele's preliminary research to the FBI bosses. Three, the FBI routinely pays third-party private intel firms to gather evidence used to secure federal search warrants and arrest warrants, as well as FISA court warrants. They do that for a reason, folks. You see, they are always concerned that they might violate or that they're going to violate the constitutional rights of Americans. But if they go to a third party, they don't have to worry about it. Four, the FBI does not vet the privately commissioned investigators, like, for example, Fusion GPS, who work off the books. Notice that, off the books for the Bureau. Five, the FBI pays such contractors from a special budget that is not part of its public expenditures. The transactions are confidential, and therefore the Freedom of Information requests on those kind of transactions are very easily, and legally denied. That's why a lot of the FOIA requests can't go anywhere. Because, quite frankly, the Bureau, when it operates like that, is operating outside, in my opinion, outside of the law. And last, Steele and the firm Fusion GPS may have performed additional privately commissioned intelligence work for the FBI. The Steele dossier on Trump, folks, has since been proven to be chock full of wild and literally unproven intelligence. In my opinion, it's chock full of nothing but blatant, malicious lies. And the more disturbing revelations is that a GOP U.S. senator from the same party as Trump assisted the FBI to perform a bogus investigation the results of which were leaked to the news media in an attempt to boost none other than Democrat Hillary Clinton's chances of winning the presidency. It wasn't enough for her to lie, cheat, and steal, getting the questions before a debate, stealing the money from Bernie Sanders, literally stealing the primary from Bernie Sanders. It wasn't enough for that. No, they had to do more, and the illustrious Senator John McCain took it upon himself to help. And it would also appear that the FBI had a definitive role in digging dirt on this presidential candidate with the likely intent to sway a presidential election. So, really, it's little wonder that the FBI has blocked efforts to turn over records on its relationship with Mr. Steele, with Fusion GPS, and quite frankly, McCain's role in putting these entities together. John McCain was part of the illegal, clandestine, dirty tricks politics that was going on trying to help Hillary Clinton. Now, a person might ask themselves, well, what is this about? Is this indicative of a man such as Senator John McCain, an American POW from Vietnam during the Vietnam era? And you know what, folks? John McCain has a bizarre history of hiding evidence about his fellow prisoners of war. John McCain has actually risen to his political prominence on his image as a Vietnam POW war hero. And he has worked hard to build that image, and he's also worked very hard to absolutely hide from the public stunning information about American prisoners in Vietnam who, unlike him, did not come home. You're hearing me right. Throughout his Senate career, folks, the great Senator John McCain has quietly sponsored and pushed into federal law a set of prohibitions that keep the most revealing information about these men buried as classified documents. And thus, the great John McCain war hero, the people would logically imagine to be a determined crusader for the interests of POWs and their families, instead became the strange champion of hiding the evidence and closing the books. Almost as striking is in the manner in which the mainstream press has shied away for years from reporting the true POW story and John McCain's role in it. Even as McCain has made his military service and his POW history the focus of his senatorial and presidential campaigns, reporters who had covered the Vietnam War have also turned their heads and walked in my opinion, other direction, while McCain doesn't talk about the missing men, and the press never asks him about them. And folks, I want you to know that the sum of the secrets that McCain has sought to hide is not small. There exists a telling mass of official documents, radio intercepts, witness depositions, satellite photographs of rescue symbols that pilots were trained to use in the event that they were captured and became a POW. There is a mass amount of electronic messages from the ground containing the individual code numbers given to these airmen. A rescue mission by a special forces unit that was aborted twice by Washington, and even sworn testimony by two defense secretaries that, and I quote, men were left behind, unquote. This imposing body of evidence, folks, suggests that a large number, and I can sit here and tell you today that it was in the hundreds, that hundreds of our U.S. prisoners that were held in Vietnam were not returned when the peace treaty was signed in January 1973, and Hanoi agreed to release 591 men, among them Navy combat pilot John S. McCain. The Pentagon had been withholding significant information from POW families for years. And what's more, the Pentagon's own POW MIA operation had been publicly shamed by internal whistleblowers and by POW families for holding back documents as part of a policy of debunking POW intelligence, even when the information was obviously credible. The pressure from the families and Vietnam veterans finally produced the creation in late 1991, almost 20 years later, of a U.S. Senate Select Committee on POW MIA Affairs. The chair of this committee was none other than John Kerry. But John McCain, who was a former POW, was its most pivotal member. And in the end, the committee became part of the debunking machine itself. Included in the evidence that McCain and his government allies suppressed or tried to discredit is a transcript, an actual transcript of a senior North Vietnamese general's briefing of the Hanoi Politburo, which was discovered in Soviet archives by an American scholar in the late mid-1990s. And the briefing took place only 4 months before the 1973 peace accords. The general, Tran Van Quang, he told the Politburo members that Hanoi was holding, now get this folks, 1,205 American prisoners, but was going to keep many of them at war's end as leverage to ensure that they were going to get paid money, reparations from Washington when the war ended. Throughout the Paris negotiations, the North Vietnamese tied the prisoner issue to the issue of post-war reparation money. And so after arguing this for several weeks, in February 1973, a formal letter to Hanoi's premier, Pham Van Dong, was sent to him by Nixon, and then President Nixon pledged $3.25 billion in post-war reconstruction aid. However, the North Vietnamese remained skeptical about these reparations. They were very concerned that the promise of those reparations would not be honored. By the way, just so that you know, it never was. It was never honored. And so Hanoi thus held back prisoners. Just no different than what it had done when the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. And they withdrew their forces from Vietnam, and many of their soldiers were held as POWs. And in order to get them back, France later agreed to pay ransom for each prisoner and brought them home. So then we take a look at two defense secretaries who served during the Vietnam War. They, in turn, also testified to the Senate POW Committee in September 1992 that the prisoners were not returned. James Schlesinger, Melvin Laird, Secretaries of Defense under Nixon, said in a public session and under oath that they based their conclusions on strong intelligence data that consisted of letters, eyewitness reports, even direct radio contacts. And under questioning, Schlesinger chose his words very carefully, and he understood clearly the volatility of the issue. And he said, and I quote, "I think that as of now, that I can come to no other conclusion that some men were left behind." Some men. We just looked at this, and it was told that over 1,200 were being held. Only less than 600 were returned, and he has the audacity to say some men were left behind. But nonetheless, he did admit that POWs were left behind. So as the years progressed, over the years, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, they received, now you're going to love this one, they received, over many years, they received 1,600 first-hand reports of sightings of live American prisoners and nearly 14,000 second-hand accounts. Don't think that these witnesses were not interrogated by the CIA, because they were. Many of them were interrogated by the Central Intelligence Agency or by the Pentagon Intelligence Agency, and they were deemed what? Absolutely credible. In the agents' reports that they wrote, they said that the information that was given to them was absolutely credible. Many of the witnesses were even given lie detector tests in every instance they passed. Sources then began to provide various individuals with copies of these witness reports. And yet the Defense Intelligence Agency, after reviewing all of them, concluded that they, and you're going to love this, you're going to hate this actually, quote unquote, do not constitute evidence that men were still alive. All of the evidence that they had, everything that they were told, they determined all of that did not constitute evidence. Does that remind you of the Imran Awan situation, that of a spy ring in Congress, that in an article recently they said they had the audacity to say that it did not constitute evidence of espionage? It's the same play. But we want to get back to the great, wonderful, amazing Senator John McCain. You see, there's also evidence that in the first months of Reagan's presidency, the White House received a ransom proposal for a number of POWs that were still alive and being held by Hanoi. And the offer, which was passed to Washington from an official of a third-party country, was in fact, that was discussed in a special meeting in the Roosevelt Room. And that, who attended there? Well, President Reagan, Vice President George Bush, CIA Director William Casey, National Security Advisor Richard Allen. And Allen confirmed that that there was an offer. He did this. He confirmed it in a sworn testimony before the Senate POW Committee in June of 1992. So we know for a fact that this took place. But here we go again, because Allen was allowed to testify. How? Oh, my goodness, behind closed doors. We can't let open testimony take place. We can't let the truth come out about our POWs or our men missing in action. We can't talk openly about the corruption of Hillary Clinton or the Clinton Foundation or the fact that Congresswoman Schultz is a damn traitor to this country. We can't talk about a Pakistani Muslim Brotherhood spy ring in Congress, just like we cannot talk, and they did not talk openly about our POWs and MIAs still in Vietnam, and nobody wanted to do anything about it. So he testified, Allen testified behind closed doors, and no information was released. Not until a San Diego Union Tribune reporter, when we still had reporters, folks, this guy was by the name of Robert Caldwell, he obtained a portion of the testimony relating to the ransom offer, and he wrote about it. And the ransom request was for $4 billion. That's what Allen testified to. He said that he told Reagan that it would be worth the president going along and let's have the negotiation, quote unquote. It would be worth the $4 billion to go along with this, and let's have the negotiations. Let's get this done and over with. When his testimony appeared in the Union Tribune, Allen, though, quickly wrote a letter to the panel, this time not under oath, and he recanted the ransom story, saying that his memory had played tricks on him. How many times have we heard that? How many times have we heard that? My memory played tricks on me. But unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. You see, there was a Treasury agent on Secret Service duty in the White House, a man by the name of John Sifrit. He came forward to say that he had overheard part of the ransom conversation in the Roosevelt Room in 1981. The Senate POW Committee voted, though, not to subpoena him to testify. Can't have that. So on November 11th, 1992, Dolores Alfon, sister of missing airman Captain Victor Apodaca, a chair of the National Alliance of Families, an organization of relatives of POW MIAs, testified at one of the Senate committee's public hearings that she asked for information about data the government had gathered from electronic devices used in a classified program that was known as PAVE Spike, P-A-V-E-S-P-I-K-E, PAVE Spike. The devices were primarily, what they were was motion sensors, folks. And they were dropped by air. They were designed to be picked up they were designed to pick up enemy troop movements. But they also had rescue capabilities. And someone on the ground, a downed airman or a prisoner on a labor gang, could manually, if they came across these, they could manually enter data into the sensor, which were regularly collected electronically by U.S. planes that would fly overhead. And Alphonse stated, without any challenge from the committee, that in 1974, a year after the supposedly complete return of prisoners, the gathered data showed that a person or people had manually entered into the sensors, just as U.S. pilots had been trained to do, no less than 20 authenticator numbers that corresponded exactly to the classified authenticator number of 20 U.S. POW MIAs who were lost, being held captive in Laos. Alphonse added that this paid spike intelligence is seamless, but the committee has not discussed it or released what it knows about the paid spike program. You're hearing this right. We left POWs in Vietnam, and the great, wonderful, illustrious POW hero John McCain helped to do it. So McCain, whose POW status had made him the committee's most powerful member, attended that hearing specifically to confront Alphonse because of her criticism of the panel's work. And McCain bellowed and berated her for a long time. His face turned red. He accused her of denigrating his patriotism. And his bullying had its effect. She broke down and began to cry. Shame on you, Senator McCain. Shame upon you. Don't think we didn't see your little antics not long ago when you strutted around in the Senate chambers, waiting for the votes to come in, and then held up your fist with your thumb held high and then turned it down. Thumbs down, like a Roman Nero. Yeah, Rome is burning. Senator McCain is playing a fiddle. Anyway, getting back to this, that after there was a pause, folks, I want you to know that Alphonse recovered. She tried to respond to Mr. McCain's scorching tirade. But McCain, what did he do? Why, he just simply turned his back on her and stormed out of the room. And the PAVE spike file has never been declassified. And so to this day, we still do not know anything about those 20 POWs. The committee's final report that was issued in January 1993 began with a 43-page executive summary. The only section that drew the mainstream press's attention, that was it. It said that only a small number, just a small number of POWs could have been left behind in 1973. But the document's remaining 1,180 pages told a whole different story. Sprinkled throughout are findings that contradict and disprove the conclusions of the whitewashed summary. This insertion of critical evidence that committee leaders had downplayed and dismissed was the work of a committee staff that had opposed and finally rebelled against the cover-up. Pages 207 and 209 of the report, for example, contain major revelations of what were either massive intelligence failures or bad intentions. These pages say that until the committee brought up the subject in 1992, no branch of the intelligence community that dealt with analysis of satellite and lower altitude photos had ever been informed of the distress signals U.S. forces were trained to use in Vietnam, nor had they ever been tasked to look for such signals from possible prisoners on the ground. In a personal briefing in 1992, high-level CIA officials spoke privately that as it became more and more difficult for either government to admit that it knew from the start about the unacknowledged prisoners, those prisoners became not only useless as bargaining chips, but also they became a risk to Hanoi's desire to be accepted into the international community. The CIA officials said that their intelligence indicated strongly that the remaining men, those who had not died from illness or hard labor or torture, were eventually executed. And today, based on other research, based on people still looking into the POW MIA atrocity, we doubt very seriously that there are any in captivity alive today. They're dead. For many reasons, including the absence of a constituency for the missing men other than their families, some veterans, some veteran groups, very, very few Americans, very few, are aware of Senator McCain's role, not only in keeping the subject out of public view, but in denying the existence, the actual existence of abandoned POWs. That is because McCain has hardly been alone in this hide the scandal campaign. The Arizona senator has actually been following the lead of every White House since Richard Nixon, and thus of every CIA director, Pentagon chief, national security advisor, among many others, and there's a reason for it. As a matter of fact, an early and critical attempt by McCain to conceal evidence involved 1990 legislation called the Truth Bill, which started in the House. It was a brief and simple document. The bill would have compelled complete transparency about prisoners and missing men. Its core sentence said that the head of each department or agency which holds or receives any records and any information, including reports which have been correlated or possibly correlated to the United States personnel listed as prisoners of war or missing in action from even World War II, the Korean conflict, and the Vietnam conflict, shall make available to the public all such records held or received by that department or agency. Bitterly opposed by the Pentagon and thus by McCain, the bill didn't go anywhere. You hear what I said? Bitterly opposed by the Pentagon and by the Honorable John McCain. The bill didn't go anywhere. And so it was reintroduced the following year. And again, it disappeared. And a few months later, a new measure. The McCain bill. The McCain bill suddenly appeared. And it created a bureaucratic maze from which only a fraction of the documents could emerge. Only the records that revealed no POW secrets. You hear what I just said? Only the information that they had already stated, only the information they wanted you to know, none of the information that was considered a secret about POWs could come out. And guess what happened? The McCain bill became law in 1991, and it remains today. It remains today. McCain was also instrumental in amending the Missing Service Personnel Act, which was strengthened in 1995 by POW advocates to include criminal penalties against Any government official who knowingly and willfully withholds from the file of a missing person any information relating to the disappearance or the whereabouts and the status of a missing person. A year later, in a closed House Senate conference on an unrelated military bill, McCain, at the behest of the Pentagon, attached a crippling amendment to that act, stripping out its only enforcement teeth, the criminal penalties, and reducing the obligations of commanders in the field to speedily search for missing men and report the incidents to the Pentagon. Oh, my Lord. The corruption. The deep, dark abyss of this corruption just has no end. I see you, John. I see you in the darkness. I see you in the inkwell. I see you swimming around. And now other people are going to see you for what you are, for what you've been. So what happened? Well, McCain argued that keeping the criminal penalties would have made it impossible for the Pentagon to find staffers willing to work on POW MIA matters. That's kind of an odd argument to make. Were staffers only willing to work if they were allowed to conceal POW records? John, I'd like to have an answer on that. Were the staffers that you referred to, were they the only ones that were willing to work and only willing to work if they were allowed to conceal POW records? You know, John, by eviscerating the law, you gave your stamp of approval to the government policy of debunking the existence of live POWs. You did. You. Mr. POW hero. And over the years, John, isn't it true that you've insisted again and again that all the evidence has been woven together by unscrupulous deceivers to create an insidious and an unpatriotic myth? You call it the work of the bizarre rankings of the MIA hobbyists. Not lobbyists, hobbyists, John, your own words. Your own words. The bizarre rankings of the MIA hobbyists. Regularly, you dishonorable piece of shit. You've regularly vilified those who kept trying to pry out classified documents. You've called them hoaxers. You've called them charlatans. You've called them conspiracy theorists. You even had the audacity to call them dime store Rambos. Family members who have personally pressed the great Senator John McCain, folks, to end the secrecy have been treated to his legendary temper. In 1996, he roughly pushed aside a group of POW family members who had waited outside a hearing room to make an appeal to him, to beg him, including a mother that was in a wheelchair, to beg him. And the only explanation that the great Honorable McCain has ever offered for his leadership on legislation that seals the POW information is that he believes that the release of such information would only stir up fresh grief for the families of those who were never accounted for in Vietnam. You know something, folks? Of all the POWs, the families that I've met over the years, and others the same way, only a few have ever said that they wanted the books closed, that they did not want to know what happened to their husbands, to their sons, to their fathers. All of them say that not knowing is what grieves them. And you know what else is interesting? It's not clear whether the taped confession. What, John? Did you not think I was going to get to that about your taped confession? That we're not going to talk about that? So anyway, it's not clear, whether the taped confession that McCain gave to his captors to avoid further torture has played a role in his post-war behavior. Now, that confession was played endlessly over the prison loudspeaker system at Ho Lo. It was done to break down the other prisoners that were there. It was also broadcast over Hanoi state radio. And reportedly, McCain confessed to being a war criminal who had bombed a school and other civilian targets. The Pentagon has copies of the confessions. You think I'm joking? I'm not joking. The Pentagon has copies of these confessions. But guess what? They won't release them. Also, no outsider has ever seen, to my knowledge, a non-redacted copy of McCain's debriefing when he returned from captivity, which amazingly is classified. But it can be made public by the great Senator John McCain. But guess what? He won't do that. No, instead, in his best-selling 1999 autobiography, Faith of My Fathers, McCain says that he felt bad throughout his captivity because he knew he was being treated more leniently than his fellow POWs, owing to his propaganda value. His high-ranking father, Rear Admiral John S. McCain II, was then the commander of U.S. forces in the Pacific. Also, in his memoir, McCain expresses guilt at having broken under the torture and given the confession. McCain, and I quote, I felt faithless and couldn't control my despair. He went on to write that, revealing that he made 2 feeble attempts at suicide. His own words, people, his own words. Tellingly, he says that he lived in dread that his father would find out about the confession. And he said, I still wince when I recall wondering if my father had heard of my disgrace. McCain still didn't know the answer, or says he didn't. When his father died in 1981, he got his answer 18 years later. That in his 1999 memoir, the senator writes, I only recently learned that the tape had been broadcast outside the prison and had come to the attention of my father. Bullshit. What? My God, do these people have no depth to the lies that they will tell? You got to be kidding me, Johnny. You only recently learned in 1991, huh? Come on. I mean, really, does this hint at explanations for McCain's efforts to bury information about prisoners or other disturbing pieces of the Vietnam War? John, did you suppress POW information because its surfacing rekindles the feelings of shame? Or who, you? Questions that need to be asked. Questions that need to be answered. Questions that the American people deserve to have an answer to. Too long we have allowed tyrants to be elected into political office and to govern us, to oppress us, and to suppress the truth that makes this nation whole, that could make this nation heal. The wound cannot heal unless it's cleaned out. It needs to be cleaned out. No different with the truth that this nation so deserves to have. So there you go. Name one. The illustrious, dishonorable John S. McCain. You've been listening to the Rock Hudson Report. This is Rock. Out. God bless you all.